and it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. Our guest this evening is Jack Brewer. Some of you may find him a little bit controversial, but I do like hearing all of the opinions out there. And before our guest, I have Alejandro Rojas coming up with the UFO news. And we're totally live here right now. Alejandro's coming up live. And I want to thank all you listeners who support the show. If you can't support the show, we still appreciate each and every one of you. And there are ways you can listen to the show for free, the entire show, that is. All you have to do is listen every Wednesday evening at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Podcast UFO, where you can also jump in the chat room. And our phone is now working. So write this number down if you would, if you're listening live, 603-967-4030. We also run our full shows, as a podcast on the Dark Matter Digital Network. It's in a new time slot, Thursdays at 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time. Well, Alejandro, before we get in the news, I want to tell our listeners that I'm shaving my head bald in 2 weeks from tonight. This is basically a benefit to honor my brother Michael and for kids with cancer, along with their families. And we've had some listeners sign up, and I really appreciate it. You can sign up right now or anytime before the event, which is April 13th. The banner to click is right on my website, podcastufo.com, and you can donate any amount that you would like to, and everything would be appreciated. So, Alejandro, you've been real supportive of me doing this, but also kind of alluding that I might look kind of scary, criminal-like with a bald head. And I got to tell you, I'm no Jason Statham, but I looked at my head in the mirror, and I think I'm going to have to, Ron Howard it with baseball caps. I don't think I have the right shaped head for a bald head. But what are you going to do?
Yeah, or maybe plaster or silly putty.
Put silly putty on my head? I look like Kojak?
Like any bumps.
Yeah. I was also thinking of getting like a Heisenberg hat and doing the whole
That's a good
Breaking
idea.
Bad thing.
But I want to clarify.
All right.
Because I did not accuse you of being like a hardcore, biker criminal type until you condoned a crime that was committed,
on your show,
crime that was committed, and that we talked about in the news. That we'll probably talk again about.
All right. Well, let's hash that out a little bit. So first of all, why don't you go ahead and tell the story?
Yeah, because I don't think all bald people look like criminals or anything, especially if they've had to do it for because they've got cancer or something like that. Which I think is so great that what you're doing. However, I think you have an ulterior motive to your shaving of your head, because one of the stories is Roswell. The Roswell Museum, about a week or so ago, some vandals, some kids, stole the UFO that is normally mounted on the side of the building and destroyed it. And how could they have done this? Did they climb up there like on that game? Remember the game with the monkeys and the dinosaurs and stuff that would climb up the building and eat the people? Rampage. They didn't pull a rampage. The UFO had fallen off during a snowstorm. It had gotten repaired, and they were about to put it back up, and they had it in the parking lot, sitting in the back, and unfortunately some teenagers saw that, and they couldn't resist. They drove their truck up there, put the UFO in the back of the truck, took off with it, and the police went looking for it. They posted information about it on their Facebook, and then finally, a few days later, the police found the UFO in pieces on the side of the road. If any of you have been to Roswell and you know this UFO, Maybe some of you came and saw me talk. I've spoken there the last few years. But they did catch one of these criminals.
Oh.
The kid who owns the truck, because there was surveillance video of this whole thing. Some tips came in on what the truck owner was. Yeah, so this is new information you might not know. And so they did bust the kid, and the kid is in jail. And so would you have been, because you said you would have stolen the UFO yourself if you had the chance, essentially.
I didn't really, but no, here's the thing. First of all, about it being broken up on the side of the road. If anyone out there has a pickup truck, you know that if you don't tie something in and it's kind of like shaped like that, it's going to fly out of the back of your truck. So I'm sure that's what happened, because they wouldn't want to destroy something like that. They wanted to hightail it and show their friends. I didn't really say that I would do that, but I was just saying, can you imagine the temptation? You drive into a parking lot, you see orange cones. In the middle of the orange cones is a UFO sitting there. It's almost too tempting. That's, for a kid, for someone young that wants to show up to friends.
I'm saying.
But I'm not condoning it.
I don't have that criminal nature like you do. I would not find that tempting myself. So.
Okay,
I
Mr.
would
Goody
maybe
Two
think
Shoes.
this is a good idea. I'll go build my own UFO, not steal someone else's.
Well, how do you know they weren't taking it home to build a model of it and bring it back?
Oh, yeah. I don't think so. They should have tied it down. Everybody knows, on the highways too, you see these guys that don't tie stuff down and it goes flying all over. Dangerous situation. Yeah. But yeah, very unfortunate that this got destroyed. And that's why I think you have this ulterior motive, because I think you're going to shave your head, you're going to get tattoos, you're going to wear dangling earrings, and you're going to get a motorcycle. And this is kind of probably your middle-age kind of
crisis,
midlife crisis thing.
Which one would this be? That's the question. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I've met your girlfriend. I don't know if she'll tolerate that. So she'll probably put an end to it if not let you get too far. Luckily, she wouldn't let you steal the UFO either, I don't think.
I don't know about that. But anyway.
Oh, you think you?
I don't know. Well, okay, so
there's that story. Updates to the Roswell UFO being stolen.
All right. Do we have
lots of other stories, though?
Okay, let's hear them.
Two more big stories. Of course, the other big story is Hillary Clinton talking to Jimmy Kimmel.
Right.
So this was about a week ago. Hillary Clinton was on the Jimmy Kimmel show, and like he has so often, he did this with Bill Clinton. He did this with President Obama. He asked, what do you know about UFOs? You said you were going to look into UFOs. He was aware, or he essentially said, your husband was on the show. He said he did look into UFOs, but tried to get the files, but he couldn't find anything. To that, Hillary Clinton said, well, I'm going to do it again. So she said she's going to look for more UFO files. John Podesta, of course, the guy who runs her campaigns, is really into this stuff. Jimmy Kimmel was surprised. She said, I'm going to look into it. And he says, well, what are you going to do with that information? And she said, well, if I look into it, I'll let the public know. And if we don't find anything, then I'll let them know about that. And he said, well, what if you do find something? And she says, well, I'll let them know about that too. Of course, she puts in this caveat. There could be, unless it has, it's detrimental to national security, then I'll get that out to the public. So very interesting. She took it very seriously. There was no indication, like I've been saying, that, Obama, I think, is joking, even though Ben Hansen has done an analysis. He doesn't necessarily agree. Several other people don't agree with that. There was also suspicion that John Podesta was joking, but he certainly is not joking. And it didn't appear that Hillary was joking either. So,
I don't think so. I talked to Seth Shostak from SETI, and he said we were talking about this, about Hillary. And so
really?
I sent him the link so he'd watch it. And then I talked to him on the phone first, and then we were communicating by email, and he wrote me back, oh, she's just joking. So,
what's interesting, it might be your fault, and he posted a blog about this on Huffington Post today.
He did? How about that?
Yeah, and it could have been you who alerted him to the whole thing. He was essentially saying that there's probably nothing there. So even if she goes and looks, there's probably nothing there. And he also said this is also assuming when you say disclosure, it's assuming there's something to disclose, and people with the Area 51 thing are assuming that aliens are there or there's UFOs there, and that's probably not the case. But yeah, he actually wrote a blog today about it.
Oh, I'll have to look at that. He's actually going to be on Midnight in the Desert tonight with Heather Wade at
wow.
Yeah, at 9 to midnight Pacific time, 12 to 3 in the morning Eastern time. So he's going to be talking about that. That was a connection. I talked to him about that as well. So anyway, I'm sure it's going to come up, especially since he wrote the blog about it.
Yeah, for sure, since that's on his mind. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah. And you said there's a lot of... What else is going on?
Yeah, I got at least one more story, just kind of an update. I think we talked about this a bit, even though I hadn't posted the video yet, to this Green Bay Packers quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, reporting that he had a UFO sighting, and that was hitting the news everywhere. I did write my story, but I was able to add something new, which was his friend. So he said he saw it with a friend in New Jersey. His friend said, well, I saw it, but I do have one correction. But that correction was simply that they weren't in New Jersey. They were nearby in Cornwall, New York. And he knows so well where they were because it was at his parents' house. So Aaron Rodgers was over his friends and his friend's parents' house when after dinner they all went outside and they saw this streak across the sky that they said was like Star Trek. And then soon after it was cloudy. So they saw this streak behind some clouds. And then they heard what they thought were 4 jets flying by. And he said, Aaron Rodgers is absolutely correct. He said, I agree with him. This was a UFO. This could not have been anything man-made. He said, we're so into this, and this was so impactful that, we're buddies and we see each other occasionally throughout the year. And almost every time we see each other, we talk about it. And he said it wasn't only us two that saw it. He said his family saw it as well. So it was a big deal to all of them, this UFO sighting that they had in 2005.
Why do you think they took so long to bring that, to talk about it publicly?
Well, why would you, especially if you're them? I mean, you just share this. I think, a lot of the listeners would agree that if you see something, mostly you're going to talk about it with your close friends you think might be open to it, but you're not going to talk to all your friends and family about it. And neither was Aaron Rodgers until he was prodded on this radio show to talk about it.
So who prodded him on the radio show? Who prodded him on the radio
host?
So he had heard about it or
something like that? I don't think he heard about it. I think the topic of UFOs came up.
Oh,
really? So he was just saying, well, he's a believer. So he's like, I saw a UFO myself. And but once he got into it, he was very enthusiastically sharing his story. And what's funny about this story is I think that Aaron Rodgers is so beloved in the sports community that he's not being made fun of. I mean, he's getting teased a bit by his friends and by other people, but they're not really making fun of him. In fact, one of the stories, I think it was even CBS Sports, said, when you hear this UFO story, you might start to believe in UFOs yourself. So
wow.
I think that's what's interesting. A lot of people give us heck when we talk about celebrities and their sightings, but a lot of people greatly respect a lot of these celebrities, even the Kardashians, or else they wouldn't be following their every move. And so when somebody talks about a UFO sighting like this guy, to me, he's just another quarterback, another football player. I don't know him very well. Really doesn't matter either way. But there are tons of people out there who love him and adore him and are going to believe him because they feel that he brings a lot of credibility. So that's what's great when these people with these large followings have these sightings and they're brave enough to talk about it, then, it opens the minds of all of those people that are their fans.
Right. Wow. I was, how I started this show, basically, of course, I'm not a celebrity by any means, but I was on a comedian's show.
To me, you are.
I was on a comedian show in California, and he asked me what was the weirdest thing that ever happened, and I told him about my UFO sighting. He teased me all the way through it, but then later contacted me and said, he did analytics, and the UFO topic was really hot, on his show. So he had a lot more listeners, and that's what kind of was the genesis of me starting this show.
Really?
Yep, because I was already doing another 2 or 3 podcasts. So this was just I thought, wow, this will be even more interesting than what I'm doing. So here it is, and we're on show 195, I think it is.
You're kidding!
No.
Wow,
so
that's great.
That's a lot. Yeah, I mean, a lot for people to listen to in the archives. And please don't listen to the first show, though; it's really bad. So now everyone will listen to it. All right. Well, hey, thanks so much. So we're all done, right?
Yeah.
All right.
We're done. Just be sure when you shave your head. I can't wait to see the pictures in the video, by the way. But
2 more weeks.
Don't get carried away. Don't turn to a life of crime. Don't go start, vandalizing and stealing. Okay?
Well,
Will you promise me that?
Yeah, I'll try. I might.
But
have to...
it is a really awesome thing you're doing. That's really great.
Thanks. So remember, you can click on the banner on my website if you want to help out and support the kids. All right, Alejandro, we'll be talking to you next week.
Okay, talk to you soon.
All right, thank you. So a little bit about our guest, Jack Brewer's interest in the paranormal and years of navigating in the UFO community led him to become convinced rationality and practicality were sorely lacking. His research and writing an intricate objectivity and relevant facts into the assessments of all prevalent fantastic UFO dogma. His interests include such topics as alleged alien abduction and intelligence community that have been explored on his blog, The UFO Trail. You can check that out, ufotrail.com. And he's recently published a book, The Grays Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community. And so you can the link to that is his book is on my website, Podcast UFO. So hang in there. We'll be coming right back with our guest, Jack Brewer, right after this tune called Black-Eyed Children by Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse. That was Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse, and he writes some music for the show. He's in Ireland. He writes for a lot of movies, too. Some I'm sure you've heard. Anyway, he wrote some tunes and dedicated it to our past amateur astronomer, Andy Fleming. And he's offering all these for free to anyone that listens to this show. There's a banner down on the website. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes, and Jack, I read a little bit of your bio, and if you can tell the listener out there a little bit of your background, I would appreciate it. Just tell them what was your first interest in UFOs and what led you to the path that you're on right now.
Sure. I had a lifelong interest in it. I think, like a lot of people, I was just fascinated with the paranormal and the idea of life in space and unidentified flying objects. I was born in Nashville and lived throughout the Southeast, New Orleans, North Carolina, the D.C. area a while. I'm currently residing in Central Florida. And by the 1990s or so, I had began attending the UFO conferences, and I was reading the books, John Mack, Whitley Strieber. Just found it fascinating. Felt that I was being open-minded by willing to consider their work and their claims. I attended Bud Hopkins lectures, and I began to feel some disappointment. It began to seem more and more clear that the advertising didn't always live up to what was in these books that were being published, the lectures. The first few times you see these speakers, it's very captivating, very gripping. It can be much less so when you see them 10 years later and it's basically the same presentation. I began to have some doubts, and I was interested enough in the material, Martin, that I dug a little deeper than what would be in the books. I would ask people about what was happening. I was actively attending MUFON meetings, the Mutual UFO Network, and their meetings, and talking to people. And that caused me to become even more concerned about the levels of accuracy that were being reported by some of the researchers, and some of the questions that weren't being asked might be a good way to put it as well. Mm-hmm. And in 2010, I began writing the blog, the UFO Trail, and I made attempts to ask relevant questions, hold people accountable when they didn't want to answer them or wouldn't answer those questions. And I eventually wrote The Grays Have Been Framed due to some of the interactions I had, the things I found. And one of the things that influenced me a lot, Martin, was my path included getting involved with a grassroots nonprofit corporation, and I was doing fundraising work, which I enjoyed and had some success as a grants writer and in nonprofit administration. And that really, I started to see some red flags then in the UFO community of things I found out were standard operating procedures in the nonprofit industry that we aren't seeing in the UFO nonprofit organizations, like transparency about funds and reports and personnel and that kind of thing. And I also came to understand through my grant writing and grant management and reporting on the grants that research projects are specifically structured with budgets and what's expected to be learned, how that information will be disseminated, how it will be measured, what the measurable results are. And at that point, I was becoming very, very disillusioned with the UFO community, and that it seemed that many of its icons and leaders were scrupulously avoiding being accountable for issues such as I just mentioned. And so at that point, I wrote The Grays Have Been Framed, and I addressed issues in which we can see that the intelligence community and questionable writers, questionable researchers have manipulated the topic for reasons that aren't always clear, but it can be documented that various individuals and organizations have attempted to, and successfully, steered the narration, steered the story of UFOs and alleged alien abduction. And I'm not saying that there is nothing, just to be clear up front, I'm not saying that there is necessarily nothing of interest in the UFO community. I think that there may be reports of high strangeness that are of interest. There's certainly, as you and Alejandro were talking to open the show, there's reports of flying objects that at the least do not have available explanations. There's certainly things to be studied. So, and that is an altogether different issue than that we can identify times that the community has been manipulated and given some poor information, and in many cases we continue to celebrate these researchers that we should be much more critical of their tactics and work that they've published, in my opinion.
Now, I've mentioned this about similar things, and actually even named a name before on this show. Sometimes I think that something goes to someone's head or the popularity of it, and may corrupt their first work. For instance, like if they did really good work in the beginning and they were known as someone that was really solid and looking for answers, and then later on, after a while, time goes by, and something changes, and maybe it's the popularity of that they've felt and grown, and then they take a wrong turn. I've seen this happen in a few different people. Are you saying generally that this is across the board, or can you say that there are some people out there that you really respect and that are working hard at trying to figure out what's going on?
I would definitely say that there are some people that are working hard and that have integrity and upright intentions. As a matter of fact, since you opened the show with Alejandro, I'll mention that I think that he's done some excellent work that just dovetails with my book. In fact, this story was certainly a inspiration for me, was his digging into Richard Doty and trying to take the story further that Greg Bishop had so well documented in Project Beta about Doty and the Benowitz affair. And Mr. Rojas, of course, queried the Air Force and asked reasonable questions and has basically been stonewalled on if Doty was an agent at the time he conducted all of this UFO nonsense, what responsibility do they bear, and how much of it was official orders, as Doty claims he was under. And that, basically their answer to that is none of our business, at least not at this point in time. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's good work. I think that a lot of people have asked reasonable questions, have been honest. In fact, I would even go as far as to say that the majority of people who report experiences, I think, are being entirely sincere. I would be comfortable in saying I think that a majority are honest and sincere. I think, however, that a minority of investigators and researchers that steer the narrative, put ideas in our heads, try to tell us what we saw, try to shape reports to meet their own agendas and discard the reports that don't, is a major part of the problem. I'd also say that I think in ufology, at least in the U.S., in North America, like Mexico, the States, and Canada, I unfortunately do feel like it's the weak link in the chain at this time internationally. I think that at least among the more popular researchers, I'm afraid that we're known abroad as being rather gullible and unscientific, and those are probably, I feel as if those are reasonable labels to put on us. And one of my biggest beefs, Martin, is I'm completely okay with, like, Aaron Rodgers saw something, him and his buddies talk about it. Somebody asked him on the radio about it. He here's what happened. Shrug your shoulders, take it or leave it. I'm completely okay with speculation and sharing our experiences and stories. One of my pet peeves is if we claim to be conducting scientific investigation and we claim to be a science-based organization, then we have responsibilities to conduct our affairs within certain guidelines and protocols, and then if we don't, we should be held accountable for that. So that's one of my big gripes is if it's not science, don't call it that.
Right. I'm totally there. I totally agree with you 100% on all that. You mentioned just a minute ago that they changed the narrative to fit, and that's quite against any type of science work.
Absolutely.
Can you give some? Do you have some examples you can give?
Sure. And David Jacobs, he's admittedly said that that's how he decides if something is accurate or not, if it fits with the other things he's been told. And I don't think that it's coincidental that it depends on who you ask as to what they think is going on, and that Barbara Lamb attracts one type of person, David Jacobs another, and I think that the benevolent space brother or the evil hybrids that rape and pillage or the interdimensional time traveler is in the eye of the beholder and often the hypnotist. And I think that people are often vulnerable. They are, as you and Alejandro led in with, they're somewhat, I don't know how much I should talk about this. They're cautious. And when they find someone that's willing to give them compassion and care, and they're then very easy to steer and to lead to conclusions that aren't supported by any evidence that they can actually be presented. And again, that would be all fine between consenting adults if that's what they want to do, but it shouldn't be advocated by an organization such as the Mutual UFO Network that claims to be dedicated to scientific study, and that's where I have a problem, that hypnosis as a memory tool and a scientific investigation are mutually exclusive of one another. And of course that's not my opinion. That's what the current mental health paradigm and the science community tells us. And so it's just an oxymoron to be presenting speakers like David Jacobs and claiming to be a scientific organization. And of course we could go into a great deal of specific cases that Jacobs has handled, the Emma Woods case and a number of others that we could scrutinize. And it's painful. It's actually painful. If you're willing to look at it below the surface, and it's easy to throw out sweeping statements like everybody reports the same thing, so it must be true. But then if you find out what these everybody's names are and what actually happens to them during these investigations and how their initial reports are then altered to meet what the investigator seems to want to write a book about, and these types of occurrences, it actually becomes painful to look at this with virtually any depth at all has been my experience. And again, I'd kind of throw in my disclaimer to a certain extent that doesn't mean that there's nothing of interest to study. That doesn't mean that there might not be something interesting that happened during the Mothman saga or the miracle at Fatima or something happened in Stevensville. I mean, what that was, I couldn't say. But there are interesting things to study, but we can certainly look at some circumstances where scientific inquiry has conclusively been misrepresented.
Okay, just for the listener listening live, you can call in the show. The phone is actually working now, 603-967-4030. Someone had a question up on the message board. They wanted to know, first of all, going back a bit, what is the particular organization that you're saying is claiming using scientific research and, in your opinion, not?
The Mutual UFO
I knew
Network.
it. That's what I answered to them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's major accountability issues there from a number of angles. You could search my blog. You could look at my book for numerous specific examples. David Jacobs and his semi-organization group, whatever he wants to call it. I think it was ICAR, like the International Center or something or other for Abduction Research. At any rate, in his bio on his website at the time I wrote the book, I don't know if he still does or not, because I haven't looked lately, but he identified himself as an advocate of strict scientific research and ethical treatment of research subjects, and I would challenge that enthusiastically. I would challenge that.
All right, I want to ask you a little bit
sure.
in just a second about what you think about his methods of hypnosis, but let's see, there was one other question I wanted to get to first. Pardon me. Boy, I just lost that. Okay, so what do you think about his methods of hypnosis?
Well, I'm not qualified to give a dissertation on hypnosis or interviewing people. I don't have the qualifications. So what I do is consult with people that do and cite research papers by people that are qualified. Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, Dr. Julia Shaw, we can go on, Chris French, Scott Lilienfeld. The list goes on, all the way back to Dr. Martin Ornay, a CIA consultant and psychology expert in the 1950s, mid-20th century, that tell us that hypnosis is not reliable as a memory retrieval tool. And it's just not. And so if people say that they know how, that they do it the right way, especially when they don't have the credentials to even be hypnotizing people, I'm insulted. I mean, I don't even know. I think it's a phenomenon in itself, Martin, that they've managed to get as much popularity and as big a following as they have, when someone like Bud Hopkins, that was an artist, and David Jacobs, that's a retired history professor, have no formal training in psychology, apparently, and to the best of my knowledge are not certified in any therapy activities or hypnosis. It's just dumbfounding to me. And the experts tell us that it's not a memory retrieval tool. They also tell us Julia Shaw and Elizabeth Loftus have done some amazing work, absolutely outstanding.
Okay, hold on. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I want to make sure I get this caller right here. Hello, caller. You're on the line. Your name, please?
My name is Donna.
Oh, hey, Donna. How are
Hey.
you? You have a question
Good.
for our guest, Jack?
Well, I just actually had a comment. I'm calling just to support Jack's assertions that hypnosis isn't any kind of a truth serum type of truth-telling kind of technique. It's a relaxation technique whereby people can retrieve memories, but it doesn't mean that they are necessarily reporting truth. There could be confabulation and a number of other things that can be happening, and it's really important to look at that because this is really critical in the abduction phenomenon is hypnosis is used, and it's really important to understand what it is and what it is not. So I just really am calling to support what Jack is saying, and to also, Jack, I don't know, I am a little familiar with your work on the Hill case. Are you listening? Can you hear me?
I can, Donna. Thanks.
Okay. All right. Yes, and I don't know if you're aware of this, and it's really a pretty critical kind of thing in that case. I know you have mentioned it in some of your work, but I actually had an opportunity to speak with Dr. Simon directly in the 1970s. My brother thought he had some sort of an experience, and I was really concerned for him, and I was seeking help back then without the internet and without a lot of resources. I lived in the Boston area and reached out to Dr. Simon directly and never thought he would call me back, but he, in fact, did call me back, and I explained what was happening, and he told me that he did not believe in UFOs, flying saucers, did not believe Betty and Barney Hill were abducted, that his hypnosis was used really for treatment of anxiety and trying to reduce the anxiety of something that had happened. He didn't say that they were lying, but it was used as a reduction for anxiety and not a truth-seeking type of a technique. But somehow this has become so here is the huge case of ufology and abductions, and here is the person who worked with them and said, yes, I think something was happening. There was anxiety as the result of, stresses that were going on with the Hills. And he actually, you could never do this now because of HIPAA laws, but he actually gave me some details about what he thought was going on with them psychologically. And I actually became a certified hypnotherapist because I'm very interested in the subject, and I wanted to understand the process of hypnosis. And what I have learned as a certified hypnotherapist is you cannot, the first thing I tell people is because you say it or you might retrieve it, does not make that an actual fact. I make them sign waivers saying that they understand that this might be confabulation, there might be some remnants of dreams and that sort of thing. So it's really, I just wanted to support what you're saying, and this is why it's important to really do the research and understand, these processes. And I think what happens is everyone just says, oh, they were under hypnosis and they said it. Well, that doesn't make it true. That is what they said. It doesn't mean they were lying, but it doesn't make it a fact. So thank you for writing about that, and that's really all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Donna.
All right.
Thanks, Donna. Let's hear what he has to say about that.
Okay. Yeah.
All right.
Bye.
Thanks.
Yes, that's a very interesting angle on Dr. Simon. I bet it was interesting to talk to him about it personally, because I have been informed and have cited where he was treating trauma. He was not conducting an investigation. He was attempting to treat trauma. And Donna sounds like she's certainly a credit to her industry. I usually don't even try to go into the different purposes that I've learned from studying people that are qualified to write and talk about it, that I've learned hypnosis has and non-ordinary states of consciousness. And as a memory retrieval tool is a vastly outdated and obscure aspect of what therapists can do with different activities that induce non-ordinary states of consciousness. And as Donna so responsibly mentioned, it certainly is not, the mental imagery that's induced is certainly not to be taken as indicative necessarily of any kind of objective reality. It's for therapeutic purposes. And pretty much the UFO community just went off the rails with the whole topic. It was much more understandable 20, 30, 40 years ago than it is for our elder community members to continue this practice now and to continue advocating and preaching it. And the UFO community generally stays at least 20 years behind the rest of the scientific community, if not 50 in the case of hypnosis. And in the 1990s, we, of course, had, and there's scientific papers written on this, we had hypnosis used as a memory tool by therapists, and a lot of innocent people were accused of things that they hadn't done, and it pretty much lost its use among mainstream therapists after all of that fallout. And we're in the UFO community, we just ignore that any of that happened and just don't incorporate it in any of our presentations or discussions. And good for Donna for having waivers and telling people what they're getting into. And that's something that, if there's any one thing I could really emphasize, it would be that if you go to a therapist, or much less someone in the UFO community that's not a therapist and is an author or something else, that you're really not even sure why they're interested in you or your case, it's really important to clarify up front what you're seeking. Identify it for yourself. What is it you want? What do you hope that this person or this organization can help you with? Identify it for yourself and then clarify it and ask them what they're doing and see if your objectives are compatible, because when we look back at what's happened in some of these cases, it's pretty clear they weren't.
Now, one thing I have to comment on about the mainstream science, I like the scientific method. I think if it's actually used purely, that's how we gain any momentum as a society in finding out things for health, for all types of reasons. But I also think that there's a section of, let's say for an example, ancient history. There are people that do not want to change the textbooks as we know them, I think, and they ignore the scientific methods. So I'm just saying that it's not just the scientific community. I think there's people that consider they're using science that want to ignore new discoveries and things, and that has happened since the beginning of time, going all the way back to Galileo. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out there.
I'd agree with that, Martin. In all fairness, the pendulum can swing both ways and is most effective in the middle. I'd certainly agree with that. We've all heard of the science papers needing to be recalled because they hedged the evidence, hedged their bets on it. We've heard of lawsuits where the funding behind the lab actually got the results that the funder wanted rather than objective research. And also, even when, as you're suggesting, even when when they're completely innocent and attempting to be objective, there's always the human element of resistance to change and subjectivity, and scientists are certainly not above that in some cases, if not all. I mean, as human beings, to some extent, all of us. And I've heard it described as trying to get an elephant to change course, that, once the rule is in place, the discovery is found and thought to be correct, the longer it stays, then the harder it is with certain research to get that elephant to slow down and turn around and take a look at something else. But also, as you're saying, the other side of that coin is the true scientific method will lead to the truth, the systematic research. But I think that's a valid point, and I'd agree with that it's not above reproach and revision to what was learned in the past.
I want to say something. I want to go back to, you were talking about Emma Woods and David Jacobs, and while David was on this show the last time, we had a caller call in and actually talk to him and confront him about this Emma Woods. And, his side, there's always two sides to a story. And his side is that she made it her life's work to, bring him down. Now, I don't know exactly what happened, but I did hear there were some, audio tapes that were played. Now, I don't know if they were manipulated or what. It's awful hard to tell. You can't really tell for sure. But anyway, he did address that. He's not running away from it. And when I saw him in Phoenix recently, I sat and talked with him a little bit, and he said that he's actually making a website to address the whole situation. It's kind of too bad that this has to happen. It kind of muddies the water and people that are trying to do some good.
Well, you threw out a lot of points there, and they all deserve attention, Martin. Thanks for bringing it up. I would start by saying that let's just hypothetically say that an investigator starts talking to people that say they've had experiences, and some of them are less stable than others. He hypnotizes these people. He works with them, hypnotizes them long distance by phone in other nations. They don't have people around for follow-up care. And let's say that this investigator has no psychological training or screening process that he's trained in designing, no oversight of how he chooses a research subject other than his whims. Who would you hold responsible if the train jumps the track in that relationship?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's the first thing to look at. The second thing would be that if we're going to accuse the research subject of making their life work doing something that would seem like a poor use of time, or that might imply mental instability, the burden would be on the accuser, not on the research subject, to prove that they're sane. And again, we're back to the investigator didn't have the qualifications in the first place to even be dancing. So I think there's a lot of things that deserve attention there, and I don't see under any circumstances how they become the primary responsibility of the individual that agreed to talk to the investigator. As far as the recordings go, I have listened to those at length. I've blogged about them lengthily as well as written about them in my book. And I don't really know what to say, Martin, other than it would be extremely difficult to listen to the statements made and assign any rationality to it. I've interviewed David Jacobs face to face, and I felt like my intelligence was insulted, and I explained that when I wrote up the interview. For example, I asked him with one of his research subjects that he claims that hybrids come in and mentally do whatever they do, throw their mental mojo over her and render her helpless, and then we're sending him instant messages via her computer, as well as, when not sending instant messages, frequent her residence. I asked him what he had been doing or why he couldn't establish some type of forensic evidence that was taking place, to which he replied to me that you wouldn't be able to because there are curtains over her windows, which I thought was just a very bizarre response to the... I just thought it was an inadequate response and a bizarre line of reasoning to even throw out. That it's just one of those things that stick in your head, and it did when I interviewed him. I still think about that, how odd an answer I thought that was. The website you mentioned, he has launched, and he has put up the recordings, and he does not deny saying things to the woman like that he wanted her to send her panties, unwashed underpants. He does not deny that he requested, that he told her that in order to keep the hybrids from assaulting her, he could send her a chastity belt. I don't know what to say, Martin. If people think that a guy could just make a mistake and was trying to conduct scientific research while talking to a woman long distance on the phone in another country that's hypnotized about sending her a chastity belt, I just don't know what to say about that. I just say I adamantly disagree.
Right. Okay. Well, we're right at the top of the hour, and there's a bunch of questions here. We're going to be talking in the next part of the show, but this question came by email just a little while ago. Excuse me. And what is we're kind of talking along these lines anyway. You may have already answered this actually, but pardon me. What is your opinion for using hypnosis as a tool for retrieving memory from abductees' missing time episodes? I'm relating this to some of the more famous cases, such as Travis Walton or the Allagash abductees. Do you discount their hypnosis memory retrieval as not being relevant or false?
I would not. Gosh, it's not that I would discount it or approve it. It's that it can't be accepted one way or the other. It's just witness testimony like anything else, except while in an even more vulnerable and impressionable state, which makes it even worse. And I was going to mention earlier, Martin, that some of the work of Dr. Julia Shaw and Dr. Elizabeth Loftus, and they have documented repeatedly how the way a question is asked will alter the response, as well as that when you use faulty memory retrieval tools like hypnosis, they're not reliable. We can't count on them. And ironically, people tend, like Donna was getting at, people tend to believe that even more than what they recall without hypnosis, which is really detrimental to a search for truth. So in cases where there's missing time, where people want to fill in the blanks, I can empathize with the desire to use memory retrieval techniques, but we don't have one. Science tells us there's not anything. The memory's more complicated than what the abduction researchers are leading us to believe. In some of those cases, I think something happened. Exactly what, I couldn't say. But like Travis Walton, for instance, is an extremely interesting case in that it differs from some of the others. And we're not talking about a memory that's retrieved and it was 25 or 30 years ago and we really don't even have a date. He had an event that happened in real time that he was missing and went somewhere. So something took place. Now, what that was, I couldn't say, but no, sir, I'm afraid I don't see that hypnosis would be helpful in identifying what that might have been.
Someone up on the message board, and I did talk to Travis about this, but I forgot what he said, but they say that Travis claims that his hypnotic session didn't do anything, didn't add anything to him, to his story. So
that may very well be correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're a little behind on some of the questions up on the message board, and one of them. And by the way, anyone is welcome to call in. I'm so excited the phone's working now, and that's 603-967-4030. Someone wanted to know what you thought about John Mack's work.
I would like to know what John Mack would be saying today. That's what interests me. I really wonder what he would think about where the genre went and what it became, and whose work he would or would not endorse today would be very interesting to me. Yeah.
And I think he was a pretty solid individual. I was really, I wasn't really into this topic when he was around. I was just like way on the outside and peeking in every now and then. But, just from looking back and talking to people about John Mack, he was a brilliant man, for one. And the fact that he took this thing serious is pretty amazing. And it's sad that he took all the trouble that he did when he took it seriously.
Yes, he certainly brought the topic to a wider audience. That's for sure. I'm a little concerned from some things I've read, like C.A. Morgan did a good paper on advocating mental health services as compared to advocating a story or an outcome. And I'm a little concerned about how John Mack would describe the work he did in that way. I'm also a little concerned about, again, we have a circumstance where David Jacobs seems to get the people being sexually abused by aliens. Barbara Lamb seems to get them that are ringing in the evolution of humankind, and John Mack seemed to get them that were spiritually awakening and finding it a kind of a bad medicine that's good for you kind of thing, if I recall correctly from reading his books. So it seems like that in itself is kind of evidence that the investigator is influencing the
wow.
Either
that or it's a law of attraction.
Right, and that's a good point, that we don't have a conclusive explanation. I really couldn't say, but I would be interested in Dr. Mack, and he was certainly qualified to have opinions on the topics, and I'd be interested what he'd say today about what took place.
Right. I know he interviewed all those kids in the Ariel school incident. Mm-hmm. I thought he did a great job then. Someone wants a question up here. They wanted me to ask what is up with Lee Haley. And evidently this person went through your website, and she claimed to be an abductee and something about a CIA experiment. Did you want to talk about that?
Leah Haley was a high-profile possible alien abductee during the 1990s, and she wrote books on it, had a lot of exposure. They were sold in the thousands by word of mouth primarily. And she came to conclude that her experiences were more likely due to human manipulation than extraterrestrials. In fact, she no longer believes that she was abducted by aliens. And she has a fascinating story that I wrote about. There's a chapter in my book on her in which her interactions with MUFON are just dumbfounding, Martin, absolutely dumbfounding, the things that took place. And you could find information about it on my blog as well, a series of events that came to be known as the Carpenter Affair. And this is certainly one of those things, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, that regardless of what might be flying in the sky that's unidentified, or regardless of what experiences of high strangeness might be valid, we can certainly identify conclusively some circumstances where the topic has been used very questionably, and the Carpenter Affair was certainly one of those. Leah was among 140 individuals that had worked with a Missouri social worker and hypnotist named John Carpenter, and he was the director of abduction research for MUFON at the time, and he exchanged data from the files of those 140 abductees he had worked with for cash with Robert Bigelow, the philanthropist. Mm-hmm. And it didn't become known for a few years publicly, and then around the turn of the century it began to leak, and it's along with some other events that were involved, is a rather fascinating story and chain of events. Eventually, Carpenter resigned from the Mutual UFO Network, and some of the people involved, Gary Hart, a researcher, was a lead reporter on it. He organized the information and assisted some of the people involved in filing a complaint against the social worker license of Carpenter in the state of Missouri, and it's just, there's just not much good about it all the way around, and it certainly brings up a number of questions, and a lot of them remain unanswered, and it's just like I say, one of those things where we can identify very questionable ethics, questionable scientific so-called work, and more questions than answers.
Wow. I want to talk about MUFON a little bit. And first of all, I want to say that I have a lot of friends that are heavily involved with MUFON. I am totally confused about MUFON in several ways. And, we had Jan Hars on. I think he's a very respectable person. I think he's really trying to do a really good job. He's got a good head on his shoulders. I think he's great in the driver's seat right now. And then, when he was on the show, some people talked about some possible CIA infiltration, called in, confronted him basically. And he was, he never denied anything. He kind of thought that, times have changed and all that. But recently, I have to say, someone that I know retired or resigned from a position in MUFON because they said that something was going on. I'm totally confused about MUFON. I think in part that I think they're doing a good job, and then I think there's an undercurrent within MUFON where some things go on, so sort of underhandedly. I hate to say it, but what's your opinion overall these days of MUFON? Not the past, but of now.
I think that you're correct that there are some very well-intentioned people. I would call some of them friends too that are involved with MUFON. I think they work hard. I think they're interested for the right reasons, and I think they're sincere. I really don't know why the organization makes some of the decisions it does at a upper management level, the board of directors. We could speculate, but I really don't know. And the bottom line, Martin, we can look at what an organization does, and although we don't know why, in the end, whether we're going to financially or morally support it or not may not really matter why they're like what their motives are. For me personally, the fact that their mission statement says they're dedicated to scientific study, yet have someone like Barbara Lamb presenting at their meetings and claiming to personally know and co-author books with alleged ET human hybrids, yet doesn't seem to have the time to get an objective third party to conduct any medical exams on such people. I just can't support an organization that does something like that. As far as intelligence infiltration, I really wouldn't know. I'm not in a position to know. And I think that over the years there's been some well-documented circumstances of spooks in ufology and consulting with MUFON. And I thought one of the biggest things that kind of flew under the radar that people really didn't seem to care about was when James Carrion accused Robert Bigelow of transferring funds for an undisclosed sponsor during the latest, not the only, the latest Bigelow MUFON dust up. And I thought, like I had told you how I got involved in nonprofit industry, and the things I'd see were other organizations, other industries were doing. That's a big deal, in the nonprofit industry for someone to not be disclosing financial matters. And especially what we know about how the intelligence community has used nonprofit corporations, what we now know through declassified documents, as conduits for funding. I mean, that's a big deal to accuse someone of moving significant figures of money. And that pretty much nobody was really interested. And I other than people like me and Carrion, and it's been kind of downhill since then. I think there are still some honest people that almost don't care what the alphabet agencies are doing. Just want to know what Aaron Rodgers saw, what Travis Walton ran into in the woods. But I don't think that we can really get at those if we don't address the pink elephants in the corner. And given that they're there, I'm pretty much out on MUFON. I just have to say a thumbs down. If they're not willing to clean the organization up and they're not willing to take responsibility for what's happening at their meetings, what people are saying, what people are suggesting others do. Of course, hypnosis is still a big deal to them and completely advocated. Then I'm just going to have to be out on the MUFON issue.
What would you like to say if you're talking about cleaning up MUFON? And it's almost like our government in a way. It's almost like it has to be completely torn down and rebuilt.
It is. My reflexive response would be that I think the train left the station. If someone or a group of people were really motivated and concerned enough and for whatever was in it for them that they were willing to try. I've thought for many years now, at some point you got to bite the bullet and you got to decide whether you're in the entertainment business or the scientific study business, and you need to make the mission statement reflect that. And it's okay if you just want to have bonfires and people come around and talk about UFOs. Fine, but you can't claim you're scientific and do that. And vice versa. If you're going to claim to be scientific, well, then Barbara Lamb has no business on your docket, on your list of speakers. So, along with a number of other people that they regularly promote and offer a stage. So they're going to have to bite the bullet and decide, can they attract an audience that will give them the revenue they need if they're presenting reasonable information as compared to what they think is selling tickets. But I'm not really sure that's even working anymore, the way the attendance and the memberships have dropped over the years.
Right. The membership was at one time somewhere around 7,000. Now it's something like 3,500.
Right.
Yeah. Let's see. A question just popped up. By the way, we're on with Jack Brewer, and we are taking calls. So if anyone wants to call in, it's 603-967-4030. Let's see. A question just popped up. But someone wanted to know earlier what your thoughts were about Kathleen Marden, which is the niece of Betty Hill. And evidently you've done some writing about the Hill case.
Yes, sir, I have. I think basically there's three kinds of information. If we really simplify it, there's information that can be conclusively confirmed to be accurate. Then we have information that can be verified to be false, that we can identify why it's incorrect. Then in between that, we have just things people say or claim that really can't be verified one way or the other. And that requires, at best, a suspension of judgment, I think. So I guess I've been more than clear enough on I'm not an advocate of hypnosis, and I'm not because the scientific community's not. And so if you claim to be working for a scientific organization, then you exclude yourself from reasonable consideration if you conduct hypnosis and you say that you know how to do it right, or that you recognize the work of people do or the information that's retrieved during hypnosis. I like Ms. Marden. The times I've interacted with her by email, I found her polite. I've certainly have nothing personally against the woman. I just don't think that they have conclusively proven their case, and I mean, at best, it's just suspension of judgment. I think the Hill case, the default setting would be that they were confused and aren't sure what happened, and then over 3 years' time of investigation and hypnosis, the story evolved in different ways and that they became more confused, I think would be what would be the most reasonable assumption. Now, if things that we're going to suspend judgment on that have not come to light yet are eventually proven, I would suspect that alien abduction would be among the least likely scenarios that happen to them. I think that covert involvement by the intelligence community would be more likely. But as I say, there's more research that needs to be done for either one of those to conclusively prove it. And the go-to explanation would be, who knows? I mean, probably just got confused or something happened that we can't prove what it was. And I think, as I outlined in my book, there are some interesting aspects of possible influence from the intelligence community. That's my opinion. I try to write about it responsibly and separate my opinion from what I can prove to be true and accurate and factual. And I outline why I think so, but I try to responsibly separate it from what can be conclusively demonstrated to be accurate.
Well, I think that there's probably a few people's heads exploding out there just because the Hill case is considered rock solid by so many.
It's the granddaddy.
Yeah. Kind of like the first really, big abduction case that was, publicized. So what do you usually get for feedback when you're objecting to the case?
You mean why would I object, or what? People
what do people like? People that read read that in your book?
Yeah, absolutely. They often want to cite the dress, that there was something on the dress, or that the shoes were scuffed, Barney's shoes were scuffed, or there was the time loss. And I think at best you can just say, well, that scuffed shoes would identify you bumped your shoes against something. I really don't know what to say about that. The things I would cite would be that it's rare that I run into someone that thinks that it's a solid case, that knows much about the things that the CIA and FBI and some intelligence agencies were doing during that specific era and in the specific areas, geographic areas that the Hills frequented, apparently. And some of that, I think, is curious. But as far as the objections, people think they were sincere. They liked them. They think they were believable. I would agree with all of that. I think that, as Donna mentioned earlier, Dr. Simon assessed that the Hills thought that what they were seeming, the mental imagery they got under hypnosis, they chose to believe indicated reality. And I believe Dr. Simon disagreed with that conclusion. And I would agree with that as well. Or at the least, I would say we can't prove that to be correct. So if there's those three kinds of information, I'd have to say I'd have to wait till more was presented.
I know there's that I saw online somewhere, someone actually sent it to me, where there was a light on top of the mountain. So you're driving a real bright light that was on top of one of the ski slopes back in 1960 or late 50s. Excuse me. And when you're driving along that highway, this person drove along that highway when that light was on and said it looked like something was moving, but it wasn't actually moving. It was just the light on top of the mountain. I don't know if you've read anything about that or not.
I have. I've read some of the theories on the lighthouse.
No, it wasn't a lighthouse. It was a ski slope light.
Oh, okay, a ski slope light. I've read some of those, and I almost look at those the same way, or at least very similar to the more extraordinary claims, in that I really can't say that is conclusively to blame either. I think one of the key parts of it is that the narrative we have now unfolded over time and came to light over time, where when it's told by a presenter, a speaker at a conference, or in a book, they often tend to just put it in chronological order, and that's really not how it came to light. Like they had the experience and they were confused and they reported a UFO sighting, and then it literally took years before they were in Dr. Simon's office. So I mean, I just don't see how you can accept that as indicative of aliens when you don't have proof there were aliens. But again, people they're free to believe what they choose, and whatever they want. If they're gonna call it a conclusive theory, though, or explanation, then they have responsibilities to come up with the goods. And oftentimes, and this cuts both ways, the skeptics or the other side of the coin, oftentimes people just get frustrated and mad if you don't agree with them. And then, we really don't get at anything when we're entitled to our beliefs, but if we expect others to adopt those beliefs and support our beliefs, then we do have responsibilities to present them with fact-based, evidence-based reasons to do so. Is where I'm coming from on such issues.
I see. Up on the message board, someone posted that was a watchtower light on Cannon Mountain in New Hampshire. Pardon me. All right, someone wanted to know, way back, I copied a message here. Do you have any abduction cases that you would like to go into details on? You can say no if you don't want to.
I suppose not. I have gone into the Leah Haley case. I've gone into the Emma Woods case at length. I've become very interested in some of Carol Rainey's work and the revelations that she's publishing about what took place in the Bud Hopkins camp. So I'm very interested in some of that, but the reason I hesitated is it's not really about alien abduction. It's about its misrepresentation. So when people ask me about alien abduction, I tend to think that they wanted to know something interesting, strange, something odd. And the focus of my recent work has been the manipulation of the genre. I think there are some people, though, a lot of them, that are sincere, that believe strange things have happened to them. I have not focused upon that kind of testimony and circumstances, however, at least not recently.
So what do you think of Carol Rainey's work?
I am proud to post her work on my blog. She recently published a 2-part post, The Singer's Hybrid Daughter, that can be viewed on my blog. And I think that she has done a good job of, again, if we go back to there's 3 kinds of information, I think she's done a good job of conclusively demonstrating that a lot of Bud's tactics and those of Bud's peers, such as David Jacobs, should be viewed more critically than has been the case. And even without Carol's input, which I think is valuable, I still think that the reason that it should be given a lot more critical review is that they demand our agreement, it seems, or at least they claim to be scientific. They claim to be presenting proof of things, but they're simply not. And as I just said, I think that's unreasonable. If they just want to present their beliefs and they want to present why and what they think about it, I think that's reasonable. To present it and claim that it's factual evidence and conclusive evidence of something, I think is unreasonable. And I think Rainey's done a very good job in demonstrating that's the case.
Okay. Someone wanted to know what your thoughts were on Jim Sparks. I know we shouldn't really be picking on these people. They can't defend themselves.
Well, that's okay, because I would say I don't have one on Mr. Sparks. I have not viewed his research well enough. About anyone, though, hopefully I'm getting kind of repetitive here so that we'll have a central theme of, I would say that if they present circumstances that can be verified as accurate, then you want to take a closer look. If they have if their information primarily consists of circumstances that can't be verified one way or the other, that's even okay as long as they don't claim that it should be taken as the gospel. So a recurring theme here, in my opinion, Martin, and an important theme, is if people conclusively demonstrate through sources that are recognized as credible by the professional research community their points and they cite them, fine, great. If they don't, well, then I just have to shrug my shoulders and say, well, there's a lot of claims. Don't know what to say about that.
Okay. Well, I have actually, I guess I'd call it picked. I've picked on a certain person on this show, and every time I do, I lose a couple of subscribers, and I get some hate mail occasionally. But one of the people out there that really bothers me, and again, they're not here to defend themselves, but is Dr. Stephen Greer. I just have issue with some of the things he's done, and basically, and you're probably really good friends with him or something. But anyway, and that's only because of I think he's abused his popularity and crossed a lot of lines. And you mentioned David Jacobs earlier, and I like David. His personality he's a nice guy. I'm not sure if I agree with things he says, but Greer has done some things that have stepped on some people's toes, I think.
Mm-hmm. I can understand your concern about Dr. Greer. I wrote some blog posts about him over the years and my concerns about his tactics and his claims that certainly fall under the category of being unverified. And I didn't write about him in my book because it's almost like there's so much to get to that I tried to focus on a few specific circumstances, and I'd completely agree with you that Dr. Greer is more of the problem than the solution, and I just couldn't get to them all. I mean, you know what I mean? It's like it was so conclusively unsubstantiated claims that I almost felt like, wow, this is, like fish in a barrel, so I'll just leave this one go,
Right. So what do you think, we talked earlier about MUFON possibly needing, a cleanup. What do you think needs to happen in the UFO field to get more of, or do you think anything can be done to get more of the straight story, or the people that are really out there really trying to figure out what's going on and are authentic? How do we separate these people? Or I've heard the expression, how do we drain the swamp?
Right. I think that we need to take more personal responsibility, Martin. I think people like you that decide to do a podcast or write a blog or put their thoughts, try to put them cohesively in a book. I think if we like that work, we should support it financially or morally, emotionally. Let those people know. Like I really appreciated Donna's call tonight because I realize that the material I cover can give people heartburn. I've been there. I have been there. I ended up feeling duped is one of the reasons I cover this material now.
Oh, and talk about that. Why?
Absolutely. Like I said, I went in the 90s and I was fascinated. I bought Bud Hopkins' books. I bought David Jacobs' work. I was like, wow, this is just incredible. And, I attended MUFON and feel very disillusioned when I began. I'll tell you one of the things that bothered me, Martin. One of the things that I couldn't convince myself not to think about. I would leave one of those UFO conventions and you're just pumped up and there's all this emotionalism and you just talk to people all weekend that they've seen them, they've been there, they know, the government's this, the government's that, and listen to this woman that was on the craft and this man that gets telepathic messages and you leave and it's like, if I just stayed around them all the time, I'd never even doubt it. And then the thing I could never really get out of my mind, though, man, was, but there's really not that one thing you can go to and say conclusively, here's the alien. Here's where the alien was. And how can all these people have so much emotionalism and pump us up like we're at some kind of political rally? Or religion, someone just wrote on this. Absolutely, mm-hmm. Absolutely. Religion is a great analogy, and you really don't deliver the goods. When these speakers say they're going to show the proof of this, and they're going to show how the CIA has that, and they don't when it comes right down to it. And I never could completely get that out of my mind. And I wanted to believe Bud Hopkins. I wanted to believe David Jacobs. And I couldn't get out of my mind that there's so much emotionalism and nothing up my sleeve, bait and switch kind of tactics going on, that I thought, well, let me look at it. Let me see. And maybe I'll find out that there's more honesty if you dig deeper. And that's not what I found. And it was disillusioning, and so I know that when I present this material, I know there's a certain percentage of people that turn the channel, that go read something else, and I empathize with that. I just feel like that the world, the universe is an interesting enough place. The moons of Jupiter that are spewing, liquids, geysers, mm-hmm. The unidentified light material on that asteroid, large, dwarf planet. I think in my lifetime they're probably going to find microscopic or microbial life somewhere on a moon or another planet. Mm-hmm. I'd be amazed if there's not life out there. But what I'm advocating is that bearing false witness doesn't bring us any more to the truth. And so back to the question of what could be done, I think take personal responsibility, support the people you think do good work. Don't support the others just because it might be the only game in town in your area for a while. Maybe do some activism and get another game going, get other speakers coming around, maybe advocate for the people that you think do good work. I think we need to reward those that we like their work. We need to boycott those that we don't. And as a collective group, I think we need to do a better job of identifying the difference between claiming to conduct scientific investigation and actually conducting it. And if people aren't claiming it, fine. But if they're claiming to be conducting scientific investigation, they have some questions to answer and some issues to be accountable for, such as measurable results, what they're expecting to find out, and so on.
Mm-hmm. No, I think there are some, we've had a few people on the show that I think are really trying to look at this scientifically in ways such as detection. There's UFO Doug Trumbull, and Mark D'Antonio. And I like Mark. He's funny. He's people kind of bash him. Now, he's the MUFON video and photo expert, but he basically has the scoop on what pictures are. And I I tested him. There was a picture taken out of my window as I was driving out to Phoenix. I showed him the picture, and there was a little bit of just a little stick on the window. You couldn't really see it, and it looked just like a disc. So I showed him the picture, and in 5 seconds he says, I think there's something on the window. So, there's people like him that really, really look hard, and he's involved in that UFO talk. And then there's another organization that's actually, there's a banner on my website, UFO Data. That's another detection and tracking that is trying to take a scientific look to see if they can catch what is going through the sky. The question that popped up on the message board was, do you think that ETs are visiting us?
My personal opinion is no. I don't think so. I don't really have any conclusive
Okay,
reason.
the interview's over.
Right.
No.
Hello. Yeah. I don't know. That doesn't mean I'm right. It just happens to be my opinion. Other people are entitled to theirs. If we can get some proof of it, not just evidence, but proof, great. I'd be the first to respect and recognize. I think that too often, and this is where the intelligence community and the charlatans and the questionable researchers have tainted the well. Too often, we confuse evidence that something took place with evidence of aliens, and we make the assumption that it's ET when the scuffed shoes or the stained dress or the photo of the triangle craft or the radiation that's detected in the trees where the UFO was spotted are not necessarily indicative of an alien presence. Could there have been an ET contact event at some point in humankind's history? Maybe. I don't know. Will there be in the future? Possibly. I of course couldn't say. I just don't know, but I'm really doubtful that such contact events are taking place on a scale of what they're being reported by writers and organizations like MUFON. I'm really skeptical of that. I'd have a hard time accepting that. Do I think that there's something maybe happening on that scale that's more normal than paranormal and we just really haven't recognized it yet? Maybe. And that's where I think science is important to promote rather than come to odds with and do battle with, because it's science that's going to find out more about consciousness, how real are dreams, how real are our thoughts, how much do our thoughts possibly manipulate or affect the material in our surroundings. And so we need to embrace, I think, some of the skeptics, some of the scientists, in the same way we'd embrace the experiencers and the people that were willing to listen to the experiencers and build bridges between those demographics. And that's where I think our real strides are going to come, because if we want to be accepted by mainstream science or we want to be accepted by the skeptics, then we have to know what they define as acceptable. And that's where we'd have to work with them. And as I mentioned earlier, sources that are recognized as credible by the professional research community. And so we need to embrace those communities, not alienate ourselves from them, I feel.
Well, here's, I listened to your side of this. I'm kind of on the other side, but I'm also with the caveat that possibly what these things that are happening are something that we haven't even thought of yet, or just totally unexplainable. But you mentioned earlier the Stephenville case. We had Robert Powell on last week. Pardon me. There's been a lot of cases, that one had radar data. There's a lot of cases that are totally unexplainable. And yes, you can jump to a conclusion that it's ET. It's definitely, like the French said on the Cometa report, I think it was, that is the most likely situation. And the reason I think it possibly is because I know that other life out there would probably not be anything like us at all, but we're exploring as far as we can. And it's very possible that other intelligences have figured out something in physics that we have not, whether it's wormholes, whether it's a different way to travel. The one question that I've always thought of, and someone has put me in my place a few times, is why would we be so special that we'd be visited 30,000 times a year in reportings? Pardon me. But I still think that, as a NASA astrophysicist said once on this show, that if they could get through the bottleneck of technology without destroying themselves, then they'd be out there exploring the stars.
You may very well be right. I think the Fermi paradox is really valuable in the questions it brings up. And as I said, you're certainly entitled to your opinion. We both are, and people can agree and disagree and have reasonable conversations about it. Absolutely. Okay,
so what do you think the extremely unexplainable cases, what are you imagining? I know neither one of us could be proven right or wrong, but what is your thoughts on what the unexplainable cases are?
If I had to venture a guess, Martin, I would say that perhaps some type of telekinetic thing might be going on in some circumstances, that people may be unintentionally manipulating their environment. In other circumstances, if I were to make conjecture on if it is actually an outside non-human intelligence, like you say, I really couldn't say. If I tried to be imaginative, I'm not so sure it's even extraterrestrial. Like, I've got my doubts about, I think the analogy has been used of how much can the bat in the attic figure out what the house is. I'm not so sure it's extraterrestrial. Squirrels don't.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Back to your suggestion of like some type of created telekinetic situation. What about mass sightings when there's thousands of people or hundreds of people that see the same thing? How could you explain that as something telekinetic?
I think in some circumstances they see something. Of course they do. They film it. They take photographs of it. I don't have any idea what it is. I think we could make some categories, and we could assume some of them are exotic aircraft, classified aircraft. We could go through some of the simple answers like yet to be better understood natural phenomena such as seem to be happening at Hess Dalen and Black Mountain Lights in North Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
I
Brown
think
Mountain.
we
Yeah.
could.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Brown Mountain. Thank you, sir. I think we could make some of the simple categories. When it got to speculating about what if they're an actual intelligence, I still think that the extraterrestrial is among the less likely. I tend to think that something that we really have difficulty even comprehending yet, a higher intelligence, a more evolved intelligence, maybe it can even travel extraterrestrially or is just in the fabric of the universe. I of course, am just entirely speculating, but even if it were an outside intelligence, a non-human intelligence, I'd need a lot of information, a lot of conclusive data to be convinced it was a visiting civilization that seems to like the most damning thing to the extraterrestrial hypothesis is plain and simply its lack of physical evidence. After all of these, like you say, thousands a year of reported sightings that for whatever reasons it seems to fall into high strangeness and paranormal, that there seemed to be such a lack of physical things left in the wake. And I know now we're going to get into debating, the method of operation and all that, but that's just kind of how I look at it, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I had a sighting myself, which kind of changed everything about the way I felt. Have you ever had a sighting personally?
I have, Martin. As a youngster, I also have some stories about what we might call ghosts or whatever. As in more recent years, I thought I saw something at a house I lived at, and then when I turned to address it, nothing was there. And at this point, I don't consider them important to the research I conduct and the things I write about. I've become more comfortable over the years with telling myself I don't know what happened. And like I was alluding to earlier, being disillusioned and angry that I felt like there were investigators and people claiming to be qualified to give me information about it, that I think those claims were pretty empty and that they really didn't know, but seemed to have vested interest in changing my opinions. And again, we could use the religious analogy or the political candidate, that people seem vested in telling you it was E.T. or ghosts or you said it was a multi-person sighting. I lived in Charlotte, North Carolina around the time you may have heard of the Snoopy 2 case. And
no.
It was fairly well known as these things go. Snoopy was the name of a police helicopter, and these policemen got in somewhat of a dogfight with two objects that they couldn't identify, and they had them on radar at the control tower, and it was a well-documented case, very, very solid case that pretty much all you can do is shrug your shoulders and say, we don't know what they saw. I mean, that's pretty much the only explanation is no explanation. So again, like we talked about at the beginning, I think there's a lot of solid work that could be done. I'm not sure how exactly we can get at answers of old cases like that, but
right.
I certainly am not here to tell anybody what they did or didn't see. I'm just advocating that we don't don't jump to conclusions and insert explanations when they're not entirely available yet.
Right. Someone wanted to know, is that actually the sighting you had?
I don't know, because I was a child, and in my memory, it's kind of confused now. Mm-hmm. I can remember when I have a memory, let me put it that way, of seeing something at night in my backyard in Charlotte, but my memory of when that happened doesn't line up entirely with the Snoopy 2 sighting. But I do remember the Snoopy 2 being a big deal and hearing about it and reading about it. So it's kind of like trying to straighten out, was that Christmas when you were 10 or when you were 12 in your memory, you know?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And so I'm not sure, honestly.
Okay. You know, up on the message board, there's some people that, I'm just going to say it, some people think you're closed-minded and, you know, that type of thing. But another post came up on the other side saying, I think he is saying he just doesn't know. Obviously, he's interested in the subject, just saying the research needs to be better. Does that kind of encapsulate?
That would absolutely be correct. I'm not telling you what you didn't see or what you did see. I'm saying that if we can't identify it, then we can't identify it. You know, I mean, we don't know what it was, right?
Well, we have about 4 minutes left, which means if anyone wants to call in, they have to do it now. It's 603-967-4030. Pardon me. Someone was saying, was it on top of a doghouse, you know, like Snoopy? Oh,
right,
people out
right.
there. So what do you think that needs to change for people doing research on this subject?
I think that we need, those of us that are writing about it, I think we need to be more responsible in separating our facts from our opinions. We can cite facts and then we can explain in our opinion what we think that indicates. I think as consumers, we need to take more responsibility in supporting the people that we think do a good job of that and not supporting those that we think do not do a good job of it. To those that feel like I was closed-minded, I appreciate that you've heard me out and that you stuck with us the whole show. I appreciate that. And I am completely open to credible and responsible research. I just, as I mentioned earlier, I have a pet peeve that if people claim to be conducting scientific investigation, they have responsibilities to remain in certain parameters. And we're not responsible that they make that claim. If they make that claim and then they are not conducting scientific investigation by definition, I think we have the right as well as the responsibility to call them on it, especially when people are getting harmed and hurt in the process.
Right. So where can someone find your, go ahead and give out your website name, and your book is right on your website too, right?
Sure. Thanks for asking. I write the UFO Trail. That's a blog, the UFO Trail. It's a Google blog, ufotrail.blogspot.com. And my book is, you can click right on it. It's in the right sidebar. It's also available on Amazon, Books A Million, or Barnes & Noble if you prefer PayPal. The Grays Have Been Framed, Exploitation in the UFO Community. And thanks again for having me, Mark.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciated you being a hospitable host.
Thanks very much. All right, everyone. So that's it for the show this evening, and I'm saying good night to our guests. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you being on. All right, next week we have Noe Torres and Ruben Uriarte on. Great people. Both of them are. Pardon me. If you're listening now, you're either listening live or on the Dark Matter Digital Network, or you're a supporter of the show, and I want to thank you all for hanging in with us. Again, like our guest said, even if you had a differing opinion, you made it this far, and I do appreciate that. Don't forget to check out the benefit that I'm doing for kids with cancer and their families. What I'm doing is I'm shaving off all my hair for that in 2 weeks, and you can find that Buzz Off banner right on my website. And believe me, it's not going to be pretty. I'm not looking forward to that part, but I am looking forward to raising money for these kids that need help. All right. Thanks so much, everyone. And we'll be back next week again with our guests, Noe and Ruben. And it's been a great night. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you next week. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.